Hey, I'm Holger, and today I present to you a chat with Alex Osterwalder. He's the creator of the business model canvas and a top 10 thinker of the world when it comes to business and strategy. He's as well a good friend, so you will notice that we will have a good chat. And for years now, we're talking about the value of visual thinking as well as communication. And I thought it would be good to have that chat with him as well because there are little to no other people who are that experienced with visual thinking, with as well thinking about innovation and being at the forefront of developing new tools. So I'm very glad I have him here, and I hope you enjoy the chat. Hey, Alex, it's good to have you. Thank you for joining me here in the call.
Real pleasure, always.
So we're old friends. I already told people in the introduction, and I just looked at the dates. So we know each other now for 13 years. So worked the first time 2011 together.
Wow.
So feels like half a
That's how
lifetime.
young we are.
And I mean, throughout the years, I think both of us tried to, in different ways, to help people understand how visual thinking works and how they could implement it in their daily work in business, right? And I would be interested again in your current view of why it's really powerful to use visual thinking in business for decision making or for communication. What do you think?
I think it's crucial and we don't use it enough. And the reason is very simple. There are things that you can describe with words, and there's things that you can describe much better when you use words to describe a visual.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that traditionally for data, right? So we will have graphs and all of that. So we're used to that. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other topics where you can use the same approach. So rather than just saying, oh, look, the different over 10 years, the sales statistics, like nobody would just talk about that. You naturally show a graph and then you explain the graph. And when you're really good at it, you will show one bar after another. So you won't commit cognitive murder, but you give little information pieces and you build it up like a movie.
Yeah.
So we do that for things like statistics and so where it's natural.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other places where visuals can be just as powerful. So discussing, in my case, right, a business model, a value proposition, an organizational culture.
Mm-hmm.
There are different variables, and it's very hard to grasp because our memory can't grasp that. We're visual beings, right? Words, something also, humans invented, but we use words to actually talk about visual things.
Ah.
So in business, we underuse the visual aspects beyond the statistics and that kind of stuff where we naturally do it. And even there, sometimes people show you tables of numbers and you get lost.
Yeah.
So that analogy, right? Seeing a table of numbers, hard to read. Showing a graph, easy to read. Well, guess what? Talking about a business model and showing it and then talking about it, completely different. So we totally underuse visuals, in particular when it comes to more strategic topics like strategy, like business models. We should use visuals a lot more together with words. It's not about not having words, but it's about using words as little as possible to describe something that can be described with visuals.
So why do you think, even though I think you have the experience too, people recognize that, people would always agree to what you just said, great arguments, but still we don't do it. I mean, I'm guilty of that too, actually. And I know some of our chats, our private chats too, when we said we are both guilty of not doing it sometimes, because even though we know it would help a conversation, sometimes we just fall back to just talking. So what do you think, or from your experience, is that happening?
So I think there are a couple of aspects that lead to that. Generally, I always fall back to visuals because I'm not super good with words. I don't enjoy just words. I like having an artifact that I can discuss, right? Something tangible. So the attention is not on me and my words, but it's actually on the artifact. So we discuss an artifact.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, when I discuss business topics, I immediately sketch something out on a whiteboard, and when I don't have one, I'm pretty annoyed. But I think that there's something to do with education. So we're not educated to use visuals a lot already. Oh, drawing and all that. And we think about visuals as a childish thing, right? It's almost like, oh, visuals, and it's when you don't understand. It's like comic books. It's all the not so serious stuff. But
Mm,
actually, it's the other way around. When you really want shared understanding and alignment, you cannot get that when you do not use visuals systematically. But we're not educated to do that.
mm-hmm,
Now, there are professions where it's more natural because visuals will represent a real thing in the world. Like when you're an architect or a designer,
yeah,
you are, always going to sketch because you're representing something that is an artifact in the real world.
mm-hmm,
But when it comes to more abstract artifacts, like a business model, like a business strategy, we're not taught how to visualize that. And
mm,
visualizing could be with templates, with constructs, like a business model canvas, like a culture map, or it could be literally with visuals and analogies. But
yeah,
we're not taught to do that. So guess what? Most business leaders do not have that in their DNA to use visuals to create clarity, to create alignment. So
mm,
it's really a teaching thing. And that's why people who come from a design school and then move to business often are more comfortable with using that. So I really think it's an education thing. I think it's accessible to everybody. You don't need to be able to draw. You need to be able to just think visual and use that in order to create alignment.
mm, mm. Yeah, I like that. Let me draw something for that because, like, just to realign what you just said, and we want to walk the talk as well, right? If we
Oh, for
can.
sure. Yeah.
Um, so, and I would like your opinion on this. So it's really interesting that you said, okay, when we have something very specific, like a architecture or something, it's pretty easy to imagine, okay, it could help if we draw that piece before we try to build it. So that's kind of a natural fit for us. But then if we have something like a business model, it's very difficult to imagine
Right.
how could we draw that? But then something else that stuck with me that you just said is that you like to have an artifact that you talk about. And I just draw the business model canvas in the center now, just for the sake of our
Yeah. Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
But so what's happening often, what I see is when people actually draw something and they actually take the pen in hand, or I mean, in our case, it would be just sticky notes, right, on the canvas. They don't even have to draw something. They start to talk about the concepts rather than about what their personal opinions are, right? Or sometimes you might have tricky challenges like what are we really offering or who are we offering it for? And if you wouldn't have an object in the center, like the business model
Yeah.
canvas, you would focus on each other and say like, no, 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 Alex, I'm of a different opinion. You're not right. I am right. But
Yeah.
when you're focusing on the canvas, you're talking about, okay, when we
Correct.
talk about the value proposition, I see connections here and here. Why do you see it differently?
Right. You're discussing the object itself and you're less focused on the other person. So
Yeah.
it becomes a lot more neutral. And,
Mm.
I like what you drew there. And if we go from very physical things like a house towards something more abstract, like a business strategy or a
Yeah.
business model, in between, there are actually concepts in business where we're more comfortable because they're easier to map because we don't need to have mental models. So
Yeah.
process models, often people, because it's complex, they will draw the process
Hmm.
because they naturally feel like, okay, I'm just going to draw what
True.
I see in the real world. And
True.
then we might use symbols. And so, but there you don't need complex mental models. The problem is when we talk strategy, when we talk business models, when we talk organizational culture, we do not have those mental models, right? So we
Yeah.
have to create them. And that was actually that was the really interesting thing when I did my doctoral dissertation with Yves Pigneur, that he had this belief that you could create mental models for more abstract topics. And we used to, get inspired by this business process handbook by Tom Malone, a researcher at MIT. But we
Mm.
said you could do the same thing for more abstract topics like business models.
Yeah.
So we do need a visual tool set, a mental model, or if you make it very concrete, when FedEx was founded, there was a napkin sketch. So
Yeah.
there are things that you can do that, are closer to the real world. But the more abstract we get, the less likely we are to draw. But the more abstract it is, the more we actually need some visuals to have a more clear understanding because
Right.
we're talking about complex things. And we will never be able to keep that in memory. And we think we're aligned, but we're not, right? Because it's too fuzzy and we didn't define what it is. So mapping these things out, not necessarily with pictures, but with mental models, and making those mental models explicit is extremely important. And that's kind of the tradition that we started with the business small canvas. Now you have a canvas on everything, and I don't think most of these canvases are really good because they weren't thought through. But you know what? They seem to create some value. So there's an art to creating good mental models like the business model canvas.
Yeah. I think I totally agree. So I think we're good on the end of simple mental models, the processes,
Yes.
specific things, and then we go to the abstract. And something's happening here that holds us back sometimes.
Yes.
I totally agree with you with the canvases as well. We have like hundreds and thousands of canvases, and we could say you founded that movement, right? So because with the I think the business model canvas was the first one that was adopted widely, at least. And
I would say as a visual tool to
yeah,
have conversations, yes.
yes,
We built the business model canvas on other concepts. You know,
yes,
Michael Porter's value chain was a visual concept before.
yeah,
However, people did not tend to use that in meetings to map out, right? So that's the thing. And that's why we called it canvas. Originally, it was called ontology. It's a very
yeah,
academic
I
word
know.
for an academic topic. But we called it canvas so that people visualize. And, you know, I think there's a huge challenge also in the Zoom world or Teams world is we fall back to talking heads.
Yeah,
So in a meeting room, we might have a whiteboard. Actually, the higher you go in the hierarchy, the more you have windows overseeing, you know, the city, but not
yeah,
a whiteboard.
yes.
But you could draw on the windows. That's good enough.
Hopefully, chalk markers or
You
something.
need the right marker to not leave, you know, things on the window. But when we are on Zoom, we don't naturally say, well, let's fall back to a visual, right? So you were drawing.
Yeah,
I have my own studio where I'd start to go to something where I could use a drawing as well.
yeah,
So we fall back to that naturally, but most people don't. So in the Zoom world, actually we go back to the worst of all worlds, which is blah, blah, blah. Us just talking, not being aligned. Though we could use visual whiteboards, or we could use, just like, you know, I showed you using my slides as a background, and I could draw on that, right? So, and you were drawing. You have a more sophisticated setup, but I think everybody should have a studio to do, you know, something like this where you're going to draw, you
yeah,
know, beside you, or
that's
a
perfect.
concept, right? So, you know, this is, let's map out the challenges of our corporate culture. What are the blockers that we have today?
Yeah,
And we kept a visual track, right? Because the other thing is when we talk, the words are like bubbles that disappear. Oh,
yeah,
what did you just say 2 minutes ago? But when we have a visual artifact, it's there. Oh, you said this 2 minutes ago. I
yeah,
actually don't believe this.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you keep something there and you're building this together. So you're working on this to get alignment. And that is just not possible with words and memory because we simply forget. If you're talking about something with 10 different objects, how the heck are you going to remember this? I can't. Some people can, but most people can't, right? So this is a pretty interesting that we fall back to blah blah heads
True.
rather than the visual tools that we have. And I just talked to a CEO last week in Norway, and he was intrigued that we have our all hands meeting when we get the team together. We're full remote. We use a visual platform. In this case, we use ours to map out, you know, cheer. So everybody starts to put up sticky notes. What kind of good behavior did you see in the team? So everybody's working, and you have this beautiful visual board evolving, super participatory. If we just said, oh, who has a kudos to save somebody in the team, in 2 minutes, you'll have 4 or 5 people speaking rather than having, you know, 40, 50 people all participating. So we just underuse visuals. It's terrible.
True. It's very terrible. And I mean, there are two things that I want to say on what you just said. So one thing is, I mean, not everybody has enough space, but in most cases, people have a wall behind them somehow, and you could place just a paper there. Or, I mean, now you have a very sophisticated studio I just have my studio here, and sometimes I grab a whiteboard,
There
right?
you go. Right.
It's not
Yeah.
high,
Yeah.
it's not high enough right now, but I mean, you can
Yeah.
draw on this on your normal camera. You don't need a
Yeah.
sophisticated setup, nothing. Just grab something to draw on, and you don't even need a document camera like I used before,
No.
right? And
Exactly.
the other thing that I'm always super fascinated when I see you working, Alex, is that you don't care for the quality of the drawings, right? Uh, and I think that is one of the major factors of holding people back is that feeling of I can't show something that
Yeah.
is not looking perfectly or that
Yes.
looks like my 4-year-old child could have drawn it, right?
Yeah.
So what is it about the scribbling that is on the one hand holding us back, on the other hand,
Yeah.
I mean, freeing up so much space because
Yeah.
you doing it all the time. And
Yeah.
as well, the feedback that you get is very
Yeah.
important, right?
Yeah. And it's super powerful. So when I do presentations, sometimes now my presentations in a small setting in a boardroom, I'd actually draw rather than using slides.
Yeah.
And the drawings build up piece by piece. So they follow me like a movie, right? We're building it up rather than one image, one complex slide.
Yeah.
And the drawings are pretty ugly, but that also means that people are more comfortable giving feedback. If
Yeah.
you have extremely refined slides with a perfect design, actually people are gonna think, oh no, that looks so beautiful and perfect. I don't dare even to say anything. And when you kind of know what you're talking about, it sounds pretty smart. Doesn't
Mhm.
always have to be, but you made
Right.
it look good. You found the right words because you've done the presentation 20 times. But if you draw and scribble and it looks kind of ugly, it opens up room for conversations because people will feel more comfortable giving feedback. That's extremely important. Now,
Mhm.
there are places where we need refined drawings. And you know what? Today we have generative AI that's
Yeah.
going to make perfect drawings for you with the right prompts. So we're not far away, but
True.
we have to understand that good looking drawings and visuals sometimes prevent the conversation. So sometimes ugly and raw actually creates better conversations because it opens up the space for discussion.
Yeah. Then people often ask me like, okay, there is like the right space, the right situation for the ugly drawings as well for the perfect drawings. And I always struggle with the answer because I try to think through the different situations and then I would say, okay, if you have a town hall meeting and you are the CEO of the company, perhaps you want to have the more perfect pictures because you want to show people how how well you thought everything through. But then on the other hand, I think, what if that CEO just took a flip chart on the stage, camera on the flip chart and him or her, and then
Yeah.
just draw out what they think?
I
Uh,
think that different techniques have different pros and cons. And I
yeah,
think really thinking through what are you trying to achieve with your communication will allow you, once you define the goals, to find the right format, right? So often drawing just also takes longer. So what I realized, I remember I had this conversation sometimes with Yves Pigneur, my, a
mm,
co-author and friend, long-term co-author and long-term friend, and former PhD supervisor. He said he's very impatient. So when I draw a presentation, everything is 10 times slower.
yeah,
And sometimes it's just not acceptable because the energy goes down and you're looking down. So it really depends what you want to achieve. Now, the nice thing is you're building something from nothing on a piece of paper. So from a storytelling aspect, that's very powerful. So
yeah,
I think you just need to define what your objective is and then find the right format. And what I learned from you is you can actually speed up the drawing part with the right techniques.
yes,
I love this idea that you taught me. You have a pre-drawn pencil drawing that nobody can see
yeah,
on a flip chart. And you know what? Super quickly, you can draw something that looks amazing
yeah,
without being able to draw simply because, somebody else has pre-drawn it through you who has some talent. So I think we're just not good enough with defining the objective of our communication,
mhm,
and then afterwards defining the style to do that, because
mm,
there's hundreds of different styles, right? Sticky notes, you put up one sticky note physically at a time,
Yeah.
rather than doing it through an animated way in slides, that has a wow effect, right? So sometimes you actually just want the wow effect. You don't want to be the 10th person using PowerPoint slides the same way. And then people say, no more slides. That's the worst of all worlds, because now you have people who are not good at storytelling trying to, like, no, just do something creative and interesting, which could be a drawing, which could be putting up physical sticky notes, statties, if you want. Those kind of techniques are completely underestimated. So rather than saying no PowerPoint, what if we said, find a more creative, interesting style once you've defined your objective? There are hundreds of ways to present visually with words. We're just not creative enough.
True. Yeah, that's a good point. And while you're talking, I'm thinking two things. So one thing I want to tell you, the other thing I need to ask you. Um, so I think in terms of deciding on the perfection of pictures, sometimes this is well the decision on, do you actually present the content, or are people watching the content on their own? So if you have a presentation, for example, and you can't even record a video for that. So imagine you send a presentation to somebody else, just the PowerPoint slides. Those should be more perfect than the ones that you're talking to, right? Because when they don't have your voice, it's easier for them to read something that looks a bit more polished than the unrefined versions. So it might be something around like, how do you actually as well deliver the content, and how do you communicate? Do you communicate live?
Huge,
Not live, right? That is like me a big
huge
decision
stuff.
point, right? Um, so the second thing is, now we're talking about presentations a lot, but then people have meetings back to back to back to back, right? Which is like a disease in companies that I see. It's all over the place. So they don't have a lot of time to prepare. And my question for the last years has always been, how could I help those people have better meetings and communication within those meetings? Because I personally see every meeting that is worthwhile joining should be like a mini workshop. You should work on something, not just sit there and listen. Um, how can we offer those people support and help? And did you see something working for yourself there?
100%. And some of it is basic best practices that are not followed. So, when we have new team members joining Strategizer, we have to remind ourselves that we work differently. We work very visually, and there's certain things we just do not do. So the number one thing that's banned in meetings is information sharing. So we do not want people to share information in a synchronous meeting, because synchronous meetings is very valuable time.
Yeah.
When people talk, it's generally too slow anyways.
Yeah.
So what we say is, you prepare a video that people watch asynchronously before they come to the meeting. So we ban information sharing as much as possible. Sometimes you can't when it's extremely short notice, but
Yeah.
in most cases you can. So when we do an all hands deck meeting, I communicate a couple of things. We use loom.com for that. In a Loom video, some of it is drawn, some of it is slides, some of it is just me as talking head, but we do not do information sharing in the meeting.
Right.
In the meeting itself, we do what you said, which is work. We discuss the content that was shared. We work on the prototype. We evaluate what was shared. We discuss solutions that require, really iterative working. But the synchronous time and the asynchronous time is used differently.
Yeah.
And that is crucial, because then, I can watch video. I watch practically all videos at double speed. And then some people in our team, I need to slow down because they're so fast speakers, they have to
Yeah,
watch at
anyways.
0.8 speed. But you can speed up, depending on, how fast can you go, how much information. So you're going to save time. Now, it does require discipline that everybody does the pre-watch. And is that always the case? Well, we have now a pretty good discipline of doing that, because we'll share the looms a couple of days in advance. And when there's no loom because it's so short notice, okay, we'll try to do information sharing, but we avoid it as much as we can.
Yeah.
And then we have techniques in the meeting so that it is participatory. We generally, for all meetings, use visual whiteboards. So if we give feedback to a idea or prototype, it will be, with Edward de Bono's thinking hats. Everybody puts up yellow hats. What do they like? Everybody, not discussing, but everybody puts up sticky notes. What do they like about the solution, the prototype? What do they not like? Black hats. And what could we change? Green hats. So
Yeah.
in a very short amount of time, you get maximum participation. It's basic facilitation rules. So meetings are not a bad thing. The way we run meetings without thinking tools, without thinking facilitation, that's actually the challenge. And then breaking, basic rules like information sharing in a meeting. That's a waste of time, because sometimes you don't need the meeting. You just need to watch the video, and you can watch it whenever you have time.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm having a quick break. I'm eating something. I can watch 2 or 3 videos. Done. Rather than trying to get 10 people at the same time into a meeting, which is a nightmare in itself. So we just break basic rules. Meetings are not the problem. The way we run the meetings is the problem.
Yeah, true.
Because there's these dogmas, right? Then people say, oh, no meetings. I said, well, you are crazy, because meetings are not the problem. It's how we run the meetings. Meetings are a good thing if you run them well.
Yeah.
I just don't think we're trained to run good meetings. It's not so easy. There's an art of running good meetings.
Yeah, totally agree. How do you deal with, like, do you have specific roles of, like, do you have somebody who owns the meeting and is kind of
The best
responsible for
meetings,
facilitating
yeah,
it?
the best meetings we run are owned by somebody who prepares a meeting structure. What are the basic stuff, like what's the agenda, but then also,
Yeah.
what are the ways that we're going to facilitate this? Are we going to do these Edward de Bono thinking hats? Does somebody need to bring in a prototype to discuss? Because the worst thing is also to develop a solution with 10 people in the room. That's not going to work. What
Yes.
works really well is you have 2 people developing a broken prototype, and then the 10 people give feedback so we can iterate. So it's those kind of basic things that you have one meeting owner that thinks that through. That has worked best. If we take our company calls, we do them every 2 months, all hands. There is a person in our team who is dedicated to turning the topic we want to discuss into the right meeting structure with the right pre-watches, so that person spends time, because that's an expensive meeting. You have our entire team from all over the world joining. That's expensive. So we say, hey, this is worth putting a person on it, probably preparing for a day, the right meeting structure. So it's not just content, it's the structure. The content is generally developed in the meeting. When do we have conversations, breakouts? So we take these things seriously. So the more people are in it, the more expensive it gets, the more you want to prepare.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And I often say to people, most meetings are actually expensive, right? Because you have those, even if you have 10 people in the room, it's quite expensive, valuable time. And
And
perhaps
then the thing I'd add, but by just looking at your drawing, see, so the drawing provokes things, is the visual artifact. So we rarely have a meeting where we don't discuss a visual artifact. So when we're talking about, the product roadmap, guess what? We have a visual product roadmap. And when we present and discuss, we go through the product roadmap. So we use a visual artifact. And then obviously for stuff like finance, we will look at extremely visual boards. So, our CFO is very good with looking at tables and making sense of it. I'm very visual. And then when we communicate to the team, we're extremely transparent. We need to have simple visuals to go through topics like finance. So we always discuss artifacts. So artifacts are the center of our meetings. The worst meetings are generally those where we just have talking heads and we have no visual support. So even for our weekly huddle, we have burning topics. We'll actually show a visual board where we go back to the same burning topics. And there's a difference with that to a document with bullet points. Because visuals, you can move things around, you can group them. And in a document or an Excel table, you're very linear. And that's not how humans actually think. So we're forced into a structure that constrains us and is very hard to follow. If we can do, it's called affinity mapping, the same kind of visuals together. It's just an art that you'll need to learn. But once you know how to use it, That's what everybody says who joins our team. Wow, now I know what it means to use visual tools. It sounds like a gimmicky thing.
Yeah.
It actually just creates so much clarity
Hmm.
that you can't go back. Once you've tasted it and you've done it, you can't sit into blah blah meetings where you just have talking heads
No.
like us today. But you went to visuals, I went a little bit,
Yeah.
right? But talking heads doesn't work for meetings.
No, absolutely not. And I think it's very important what you just said, and that might be a good closer for our call as well today, is those techniques are not fancy and they're not difficult to do. So when you say you have a visual artifact and a whiteboard with sticky notes, you could build that within every possible technology, right? So you can use a virtual whiteboard. You could use the Strategizer software, right? You could use any other software. You could even use PowerPoint, right? You could build a
100%.
PowerPoint slide with sticky notes, right?
Right.
PowerPoint is not only useful for presentations, but you can
Is a
build
keynote,
it.
right? The one I
Yeah,
use here is a keynote, and you actually
yeah,
have in Zoom itself and in Teams, you have whiteboards, right? Then
yeah,
you say, oh, I want to talk about customer. Now you have a mental model customer profile where you have
yeah,
jobs, pains, and gains.
yeah,
And you go back to this thing that you've developed with your team. You can
yeah,
always go back to, oh, what were the one, two, three?
yeah,
It's impossible to really get a shared understanding without those things. And technology is not the challenge, right?
no,
It's us as humans not having the reflex to go back to those visual artifacts that create clarity. And it's
yeah,
all about clarity and alignment. And I can guarantee you, running a company, I'm CEO,
mhm,
the one thing that we underestimate is clarity. So there is no such thing as over communication. You
mhm,
need to say the same things again. And the more you have visuals to do that, the easier it is to go back to an artifact. It's just discipline.
yeah, it is. Yeah, it's wonderful. I think that's pretty cool. So when we're closing it, thank you for joining me today, Alex. And we're doing this because I'm running a Kickstarter campaign right now with the reward tier of a visual thinking communication webinar where we talk more about these topics as well. The new book, the 30-day visual thinking challenge. So if people see this and want to grab it, it's still open for 8 days when you're watching this today. But then, like, where could people find you and your work? Because I mean, you have done so much. We've seen the books in the background. So, but what else do you do? Where do people go?
So just go to strategizer.com. You can see on the background there, or find me on LinkedIn. So I do post a lot. Some of it is videos with drawings. I like putting visuals out there as well.
Mhm.
Forced a little bit to use more words, not my favorite thing. So when we write books, we actually have concepts and then describe the concepts with word around it.
Yeah.
You can't really do that in LinkedIn in an easy way.
Mhm.
But so we put a lot of stuff out there. And I think the one, I don't have as much time. That's why I really appreciate you doing this, is the visual part. So I kind of do it a little bit, but it's the discipline, getting business people to use visuals more tactically and strategically
Mhm.
will just create much more alignment and better communication. So I appreciate, what I learned from you and the conversations we had together around visual tools and how can you even better present using visuals. There's no limits, right? It's like, oh, PowerPoint, no PowerPoint. No, it's a bit more sophisticated than that, right? So I really appreciate what I could learn from you. And I try to share in my little space. So let's push the movement further.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So thank you for being here with me. Thank you, Alex.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it. And one more time, the Kickstarter is live currently at holgernielspol.com/autism. Yes, it's a children's book about autism, and within that campaign, I have the visual thinking webinar bundle where I will offer a 2-hour live webinar around visual thinking and communication, not aimed on autism, but in general for everybody who want to up their game, as well as I publish for the first time the new book, the 30-day visual thinking challenge, as an ebook through that campaign as well, because I just figured communication and autism somehow go along, so it could be valuable for anybody in that field as well as in business. So hop on over to the campaign and see if you want to grab that reward.